Well, good morning, everybody.
G'day.
Welcome back to Theology Thursday. Getting a little chillier. We're starting to wear jumpers up here in Queensland. I've even got jeans on today. Ooh. So Dave, you had a question asked of you recently.
Yes, an interesting question, and that is, did Methuselah and Noah and Adam really live more than 900 years?
Yeah.
Or is that just some figurative number?
Right.
If they live that long, how come we don't?
Yeah, because this is in the book of Genesis where you read some genealogies and it says, they lived these vastly long years, over centuries.
Methuselah, 969 years, Jared, 962, Noah, 950, Adam.
And yet nowadays, most people don't even live till 100. We're back down in the 80s and 90s if we're lucky.
And then after the flood, we know that Noah's son, he lived 600 years, but his son was then only 438, and then it went.
So there was a decline in lifespans after the flood.
Yep. Until we reached David at 70 and Solomon at 80, which is around about where we're at now.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think it's a good question, and one that I'm sure a lot of people have secretly wondered about.
So there's a few theories on this, aren't there, Dave?
Yeah, some think it's just figurative. So let's just have a brief look at the figurative one first. Mm-hmm. Many people do not want to take very much of Genesis on face value.
Right.
And they want to explain away so much of the recorded history of humanity as simply being stories from which we can learn certain principles or things. And that's to do with their worldview. Yeah. And they will always see things, as everybody does, through their worldview, through that prism. And I look at things through the prism of my worldview. Right. And the same applies to you and people out there watching. Yeah. We all do that. That's natural. So many theories have been proposed to explain the claimed longevity in the Bible's patriarchs, and some have used a mathematical correction. For example, they say the recorded years are actually just months. But that leads to other problems.
Sure,
like some of the patriarchs, if we apply the years to months, they had children while they themselves were still children. If we use the same mathematical correction, it would mean that Noah built the ark in 6 months rather than somewhere between 70 and 100 years.
And does that mean they also use that same mathematical correction for the people after the flood, whose lifespans were actually dramatically smaller? Why the sudden change?
Yep.
And is it just coincidence that it happened on the year of the flood that people started having much less lifespans?
That's right. Another theory proposes that the purported lifespans of the patriarchs are just actually indications of their influence or their family line, but things don't add up chronologically with eras and family trees if we do that. We have to ask, Adam living 930 means he attained great wisdom? Well, if we apply the same reasoning, we find that David, who wasn't exactly dumb, died out at 70. And we say, well, that doesn't fit. If Seth was so influential that he lived to 912, or that number is recorded, where are the books recording his influence, such as we have from Moses, who lived just 120 years?
Sure.
In other words, we can't just propose a scale indicating influence or wisdom without some further definition of what those numbers actually mean.
Yeah.
Some suggest that people didn't know how to tell time accurately back then.
And that one doesn't really stack up. Those guys, they understood the seasons, of course.
Probably better than us. They mightn't have had clocks that took times down to the minute, but they were real observers of the sun and the moon and the stars. And if they hadn't have been, they would have starved. They had to know when to plant and harvest, to hunt, and the migratory and hibernation patterns of animals through the seasons.
They might not have had iPhones with a calendar on it, but they certainly could tell, a season and the months and the years. For sure.
That's for sure. So I generally disregard the figurative answers and instead look at the question of how and why did they live so long.
Probably is worth saying though, Dave, that while both you and I would agree that the genealogies in the Bible are accurate, so we need to ask, well, how did they live so long, assuming that we're assuming they did, it's not a deal breaker for people who don't. That's fine. It's not nothing to do with our faith and salvation. It's not in the great creeds of the faith. So don't get worried. It's not a deal breaker. If you believe that those numbers are figurative, knock yourself out. That's fine. But both Dave and I tend to think, because of the reasons Dave's outlined here, that they probably are accurate, actually.
Yeah, I like to find a reason that satisfies me both from a science perspective as well as a theological perspective. What's logical, what fits, and what fits the Bible as well. So, having considered the question and the solutions that the people have offered, I've reached something that satisfies me, but it also answers a few other questions that some raise about the early centuries of human existence. Science shows us clearly that the whole Earth once had a temperate climate, and that all changed in just an instant.
Yeah.
And we know it was very instant. We'll get to that in a
Yeah,
few.
well, for example, the vast coal fields in Australia, for example, that are now desert. Coal is essentially trees and that are being compressed under and heated under thousands of years, a great amount of pressure. So we know there were trees there. We know there was a forest.
But do we also understand that it doesn't necessarily take thousands of years, and that was proved at Mount St Helens when the explosion of Mount St Helens. There were trees down in a swamp, and they coalified in about 12 months.
Yeah, right.
Which is amazing.
But we know that yes, it was once a temperate climate. There was a forest. The oil fields and the coal fields in particular are proof of that.
In Genesis, we read that God said, "Let there be a space between the waters to separate the waters of the heaven from the waters of the earth." And that's what happened. God made this space to separate the waters of the earth from the waters of the heaven. That's New Living, the way it puts it. So here in Genesis 1:6-7, we're told that God did place vast amounts of water on the earth and above the earth, or in the sky, in other words. But this water in the sky wasn't in the form of clouds because it didn't rain. God tells us that instead of rain, springs came up from the ground and watered the land. And we're told in Hebrews chapter 11, by faith when Noah was warned about things that he had never seen, he built an ark to save his family. So he was told that it would rain, but he had never seen rain or storms or flooding. So he was acting in faith and obedience to God with something that he'd never even seen before.
Wow.
So I believe that there was some form of water canopy surrounding the earth, and the earth was probably straighter on its axis, and these two factors would have produced a worldwide greenhouse effect, resulting in a mild climate across the whole of the planet. And such a water canopy would have filtered out a lot of harmful cosmic radiation and slowed down the aging process.
Right. So this cosmic radiation is really
harmful.
it's the one big clue, isn't it? If you were to live on try to live on a planet without it, without some protection, you wouldn't live very long.
No.
But what we're saying is, what if there was something that doesn't exist now, or it doesn't exist in the same way it did, that really protected life on Earth? Then you could presumably live a lot longer.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the light and heat at ground level would probably have been less intense, and the vapour canopy would stop heat escaping into the atmosphere. So it kind of creates a greenhouse almost, this temperate climate across the earth. And it would also condense the air beneath it. And I think this is important because it increases air pressure at ground level. And this meant that lots more oxygen per square inch for an organism to take in at any one time. It's called the Hyperbaric Condition. It promotes rapid growth and large size, as well as rapid healing and cell regeneration.
I guess this is why, botanists use greenhouses to grow plants. They grow faster and better and bigger, and because of that greenhouse environment.
So that there are.
So I guess that could apply to us as humans or as animals. Things could last longer.
Yep. There are other factors that may have contributed to the longevity of the antediluvian population. For example, Adam was the genetically perfect creation of God.
Right.
He had no physical or genetic faults, and he would have passed on this incredible health to his children, and it would have taken a while for the gene pool to deteriorate, so long life would have been expected initially. The antediluvian diet was also quite different. It was certainly vegetarian, but those plants that were eaten, of course, were also protected by all of this, and so we don't know. That could have had a great effect as well. It created, because they were created in a perfect state, they could have contributed to man's health and longevity.
Yeah.
And there are other lifestyle issues that contributed as well.
So really, because of because of many different factors, not least of which being cosmic radiation, that is more prevalent now than it would have been back then. Things have actually devolved.
Yes,
with like disease and other things have crept in, but these other big ticket items like...
But disease is an important one, because early in creation there would have been no disease, and then there would have certainly been less disease and less harmful bacteria, so the impact of harmful viruses and bacteria would have been minimalised. There's so many things that we don't know, but all of them seem to contribute to the same conclusion. Man could have lived for a long time. So what changed all of that? I believe, this is, and a lot of other people as well, believe that a large meteorite struck the Earth. Now we know that is a fact somewhere in history, we just don't know when. And that would have created widespread consequence. And there is certainly evidence there in the scientific world. We can pretty much take it to the place where it hit. So we know that something has happened. There would be some natural reactions across the planet with such a heavy strike. A sudden tilt of the Earth would have snap frozen the two polar regions. And the evidence that this occurred is we find mammoths that they've found in the ice, and they're still got green vegetables in their mouth.
Yeah, that one they found in Russia in this last century, it was
either a very slow eater or it happened quickly. I'd go for happened quickly. The evidence is there for anyone to see. They were snap frozen.
Yeah, and I think generally, popular science would agree that there was an ice age and may well have been triggered by a massive meteorite strike.
But they won't or can't explain why a mammoth is frozen while he's still eating. That had to be quick. It had to be quick. So such an impact would cause salt water to reach the water canopy, and the salt, you put salt into water vapour, and you're going to collapse the canopy, and that would bring massive rainfall and universal flooding. So I think this was the trigger that God used to set the flood in the day of Noah. So there would have been massive geological impacts, volcanic eruptions. The Bible talks about the fountains of the deep being opened. And some people say that's water. No. That's the fountains of the deep are the geological reactions to lava. Massive geological fracturing.
I've always accepted that it was water. Water underneath the crust of the earth trapped there, and that these things came out as well. Big geysers.
I think the fountains of the deep. There was plenty of water on the earth and falling, but I think the fountains of the deep were the geological fountains that were coming up, and probably at that point the continents separated, because there would have been massive geological fracturing occurring. The Bible says there was a single landmass prior to the flood. If you read it carefully, it says that God separated the waters into one place and the land into one place. So we had a single landmass.
Pangea.
Yes. And so after that fracturing, we've got the continents, and they're all still trying to come back together. So there would have been a huge amount of sudden input of silt into the oceans as well, and this is the most logical explanation of fossils that we have, of things like a fish in the process of eating a fish, and suddenly it's fossilised.
Right.
Now, they don't eat that slowly, just like the mammoths. So it had to happen suddenly. Siltation and pressure to make a fossil of an animal eating another, or fish eating a fish. So if you look at the massive graveyards of dinosaurs and other creatures, only something that was instant and cataclysmic could explain them. No living creature on Earth would have survived except that God had saved Noah and his family and a huge range of animals in the ark. I reckon the first few days in the ark would have been really rough boating. I think
while it was still, the whole earth was moving around, yes, I'm sure it was.
I reckon they would have liked seasick tablets.
Yeah, for sure.
We don't have time to go into more detail, but I think that's a picture. The loss of the radiation filtering water canopy would have had a huge impact on the lifespan of every living creature in the post-flood world. Likewise, the huge changes in the environment would have had an impact. Cultivated fields were wiped out. Before the flood, the land had been a perfect creation, and then it was subjected to the fall, but now it was completely obliterated.
Yeah.
And in addition, something changed in the human body as God allowed man to eat meat instead of just plants when he came off the ark.
The vegans will love this bit.
Yes.
That the vegetarian diet may have contributed to longer life.
And it's interesting, it's quite possible, and personally I think fairly probable, that not only man was vegetarian, but so many of the other animals were. During the Blitz in London, they ran out of meat to give to their meat-eating animals like the lions and tigers.
In the zoo, right.
And so they gave them a vegetarian diet, and the animals prospered on it.
Wow.
They didn't die off, they actually prospered on it. Maybe that was part of the original design for not only humans, but for the animal kingdom as well, which means that on the ark...
Although they do seem to have teeth that are specifically designed for killing animals.
The teeth tell us how they ate, not what they ate. But yeah, that's for another day. That's a big one. But it does. If you look at the skull of a hippo, or is it a rhino? One of those two is totally herbivorous, and yet when you look at the jaws, you would be absolutely certain it was a carnivorous creature.
Well, the old hippo is the deadliest animal, and yet it is vegetarian.
Yep. So as a result of all of that change, man's lifespan decreased rapidly as a result of the flood. And if the same is true of other living creatures, which it was, including reptiles, many reptiles continue to grow as long as they live.
Right.
So if you want to determine the age of a crocodile, you measure its snout to tail. You want to make sure it's anaesthetised first, but that's what they would do. So a crocodile about 120 years old will be around the 6 metre mark. Imagine the size of a 900-year-old crocodile.
Yeah, if they too lived long lifespans before the flood.
And that is all very likely that they did. But that would also explain to me the dinosaurs, because the dinosaurs are just big lizards.
Right.
Dinosaur, terrible lizard.
Yeah.
They live concurrently with man. And we find Job talk about them. Job talked about
the behemoth,
this creature
Leviathan,
with a tail the size of a cedar.
Yeah.
Now, that's not an elephant with his little one. That's what animals have the tail the size of a cedar? None today, that's for sure. Yeah. And so maybe a 900-year-old crocodile would, or a few other of the... And people say, well, why didn't Noah take dinosaurs onto the ark? Well, he did. But he would have taken little fellas, just lizards, and he wouldn't have taken 900-year-old ones.
Not the big Brontosaurus.
Yeah.
Wouldn't fit.
No, that's right. So a major effect that seems to have affected the span of human life was the Tower of Babel. And we don't know exactly when the Tower of Babel was built, other than it was in the days of Peleg.
Yeah.
We find that in Genesis 10. And it's interesting to note that Peleg and all of the generations after him saw their lifespans at least cut in half.
Right.
So Noah's son Shem and his next three descendants actually outlived the next generations.
Yeah.
Shem, Noah's son, outlived Terah, Abraham's father.
Yeah.
So the dispersion of people groups from a central civilised location seems to have done almost as much damage as the flood, because it would change the diets of people, the environment that they were living in, and so forth. So I think the ages in the Bible
It's an interesting theory, yeah.
Yeah, I think the ages in the Bible are actual ages, and the reasons for the shortened lifespans now are found in the flood primarily, plus the human diaspora following Babel. So I take them as they stand.
Look, see, if you're interested in the actual ages and things, there are charts like this one readily available on the internet, which will show you when, that there's Adam, and when he was 130 years old, he had his son Seth, and then he lived another, what does it say, 500, and my eyes are too blurry to tell you, but there's a lot of time, you can see there with the flood, when the flood happened, and how instantly lifespans became a lot shorter.
And you notice on those things too, that the flood, lifespans dropped. And then Babel, they dropped again. So
have a look at one of those charts if you like. I looked up that one. It was just Genesis timeline from Adam to Abraham. But there are others out there, and they're fascinating if you're interested in that sort of thing. So again, don't get too hung up on it all. It's certainly not a salvation issue. It's not one of the core tenets of the faith, but it's interesting to look into. So thanks for doing all that research for us, Dave.
That's fine.
Got some interesting theories there.
And if people want more information, they can come and ask. That's no problem at all. Write in. And if you've got any other questions, things that you've wondered about, not necessarily this subject, but anything at all, write in, and we're happy to look at some of those and address them on Theo Thursday.
So God bless you.
We'll be having a break.
We will. I'm off on holidays for a couple of weeks, so we'll be back in 3 weeks' time. So have a great weekend, and God bless you.
Bless you.